This is the most mysterious fish in the whole world. It was transformed from the souls of the dead. It's said that it has lived for 60 years. Many people have seen its figure before, but no one has ever been able to catch it, except for one person, and that's Edward. The big fish never takes the bait, because it has a human soul. But Edward knew that there was one thing in the world that could make a free soul put on shackles willingly, and that was marriage. Edward used his gold ring as bait. The next moment, the big fish leaped out, opened its mouth, and swallowed the ring. Edward rushed forward and hugged the big fish, and fought with it for 3 days and 3 nights. Finally managed to subdue the big fish. But at this time, Edward's wife was about to give birth. The neighbor came to the riverside to look for Edward. Hearing the news that his son was born, Edward was overjoyed, and the fish took the chance and slipped away. Edward named his son William. Since William was born, he had been constantly listening to his father telling the story of this big fish. Until William's wedding banquet, his father was still patiently repeating the story. Looking at his father dancing and gesturing in front of him, William's patience ran out. He thought his father was like a funny clown, making up one story after another to brag about himself, and making himself lose face in front of all the guests. After the wedding, William had a big quarrel with his father, and they parted on bad terms. In the following 3 years, William never went back home once. On this day, William got a phone call and then knew that his father was seriously ill, and wanted to see his son for the last time before passing away. Hearing this news, William was stunned. He could hardly believe that this always optimistic and humorous father would leave him one day. William picked up the phone, and stories told by his father began to appear in his mind. Edward was extraordinary since he was a child. On the day he was born, he wasn't delivered by a nurse like ordinary people. Instead, he jumped out of his mother's belly like a fish, which shocked everyone in the hospital. When he was little, his father was crazy about adventures. Hearing that there was a terrifying witch in the forest behind the village, he went into the forest with his little friends excitedly, carrying lamps. It said that the witch had a mysterious glass ball. People could see their own death from it. Deep in the forest was a gloomy old castle. His little friends were scared. Edward volunteered to go forward and knock on the door. The one who opened the door was an old woman with white hair. She had only one eye. His little friends waited in the dark for a long time, but didn't see Edward come back. They were trembling with fear. At this time, Edward showed up in front of them with a pale face. His little friends immediately surrounded him and asked where the glass ball was. Before Edward could say anything, the witch appeared behind him, suddenly took off her eye patch. It turned out that the other eye was that mysterious glass ball. One person couldn't dodge in time and saw his own death from the witch's glass eye. He was so scared that his face turned ashen, and everyone scattered. Edward was also scared, but he still wanted to know how he would die. The witch showed a strange smile and took off the eye patch. Edward witnessed his own death, but he wasn't afraid, because by knowing his cause of death in advance, he knew that he wouldn't die in any other circumstances. The witch didn't say yes or no and turned around, walked into the castle, and closed the door. This man is named Edward. It's said that he had seen his own death in the witch's eye before, but this time, the doctor pronounced the death sentence on him. William walked into his father's house with his wife. Everyone present knew that Edward didn't have much time left. Only Edward himself refused to believe it, because the witch had told him the real cause of death. And it wasn't time yet. William asked him, "What did you see in the glass eye?" But Edward refused to reveal it and just gave a mysterious smile. This reminded William of the stories Edward had told him. Edward often said that goldfish were small because they were kept in fish tanks and thought the world was that small. If goldfish were put into the ocean, they would grow very big. Edward always felt that he was that goldfish. The small town where he was born was that fish tank. This place couldn't hold him at all. His idol was a poet who traveled around the world. When he was 18 years old, the arrival of a giant shattered Edward's peaceful life. The giant wantonly trampled on the buildings in the town. People were terribly frightened. Edward volunteered to negotiate with the giant because he knew his real cause of death. Edward wasn't afraid at all. He boldly angered the giant, but the giant told him that he wasn't a man-eating monster. He was just hungry and wanted to go into the town to find something to eat. Learning that people in the town were all afraid of him, the giant was very sad. He hadn't been trusted by people since he was born. Everyone regarded him as a monster. Looking at the giant in front of him, Edward had a bold idea. He said to the giant, "It's too small here to accommodate you, nor can it hold my ambitions. Why not come with me?" The giant happily agreed. Just like that, Edward left home and followed in the footsteps of his idol. The poet embarked on an unknown journey. Before leaving, he took a key to the small town. When they came to a fork in the road, the giant chose to take the main road while Edward picked the path. They agreed to meet at the next intersection. At the end of the path was a cave full of spider webs. Edward walked into the cave, and the scene inside shocked him greatly. There was a mysterious ghost town hidden in the cave. The people here were all warm and hospitable, but the ghost town had a strange rule that everyone had to hang their shoes at the entrance of the town, and everyone in the town was barefoot. Edward met a little blonde girl. With the help of the girl, Edward found his idol, the poet. However, the poet was no longer the energetic and high-spirited man he used to be. He was living a carefree life in the town. In 12 years, he had only written 3 lines of poetry. Edward took the notebook, and it said, "The grass is really green, the sky is really blue, and the ghost town is really beautiful." Edward understood that this town would make people content with the status quo and waste their lives here just like the poet. At night, the villagers in the town prepared a bonfire party for Edward. Edward saw the little blonde girl again. The girl liked Edward very much and begged him to stay and tell her stories. But Edward told her, "I must leave because I don't want to waste my life." The girl reminded him, "You don't have shoes." But Edward said, "I'll leave even without shoes." Just like that, Edward left the ghost town barefoot step by step and met the giant at the next intersection. The two continued on their way and came across a circus. Both of them were attracted by it. The reason the giant was attracted was that the boss liked him very much and wanted to hire him as an employee. The giant, who had been discriminated against since childhood, got recognition and felt that he had realized his life value. So, he happily stayed at the circus, and Edward saw a girl at the circus and fell in love with her at first sight. Edward volunteered to stay and worked for the boss for free for 3 years just to get to know this girl. After 3 years, Edward knew the girl's name and address, and also knew that the girl liked daffodils. Edward came to the girl's home, but found that she had already got engaged, and her fiancé was Price, his childhood friend. Now Price was a fitness enthusiast, with a muscular build and a hot temper. But Edward didn't give up. He started to write love letters to the girl one by one, writing down all his thoughts of missing her in the past 3 years. He also collected daffodils from various places and planted a sea of flowers downstairs of the girl's house. When the girl opened the window, what she saw was a full view of daffodils and Edward in the flower field. Everyone in the town was attracted by the daffodils. Price also noticed Edward's intention. He rushed over and fought with Edward, but the girl gave the ring back to him and told Price that she loved Edward. Just like that, the girl became William's mother, and they held their wedding in the daffodil field. Not long after the wedding, news came that Price had died. He died of a heart attack caused by excessive exercise, which confirmed the witch's prophecy. Do you believe that there are really giants in this world, and the big fish transformed from the souls of the dead? Werewolves that would show their true forms on the night of the full moon, and conjoined twin sisters. Edward claimed that he had seen all these with his own eyes and told these stories to his son William. William's wife was deeply touched, but William was indifferent. He thought that these were all lies made up by his father, just tricks to deceive children. But when he was tidying up the house the next day, William actually found a deed for the ghost town. William found the ghost town according to the address. The one who opened the door for him was a young woman. She was that little blonde girl before. Her name was Jenny. Jenny told him that Edward had come to the ghost town twice. The second time, the town went bankrupt, and the land was going to be mortgaged. Edward went around everywhere for the sake of the town. He found his friends, the giant, the circus owner, and the conjoined twin sisters. With everyone's joint efforts, the town was saved. To help the town regain its former glory, Edward helped every household renovate their houses. In the end, there was only one dilapidated house left in the whole town, and that was Jenny's house. Edward pushed the door open and walked in. Jenny looked at Edward sadly and said, "You came too early last time, and this time you came too late." Jenny had already gotten married, and her married life was not happy. To help Jenny, Edward and his friends transformed Jenny's dilapidated cottage into a beautiful big house. Jenny was extremely moved and confessed her love to Edward, but Edward refused her because he only had his wife and son William in his heart. Hearing Jenny's story, William was deeply moved. It turned out that his father's stories were true. He then asked Jenny if she knew about his father's other experiences, such as what exactly he had seen in the witch's eye. Jenny told him that she was the witch. William then realized that Jenny looked exactly the same as the witch described by his father, except that she wasn't that old and her hair wasn't white. After Edward left, Jenny lived a secluded life and gradually became the witch in people's mouths. She also hid herself in Edward's story, as this was the only way she could have a connection with her beloved. William found the answer he was looking for and returned home with a completely different mood. By this time, his father was on his deathbed. The wife he had deeply loved and kissed for the last time was sent to the hospital bed. William stayed beside his father. The doctor on duty was his father's friend and also the attending physician who delivered his mother. William asked the doctor about what happened when he was born. He wanted to know if the story of the big fish was true. The doctor smiled and said, "Do you want to know the truth? The truth is that everything went smoothly that day. You were born on an ordinary afternoon. The only regret was that your father wasn't present that day. Which one do you prefer to believe, the dull truth or the legendary story of the big fish?" The doctor patted William and walked out, leaving William alone silently with his father. Late at night, Edward woke up for the last time. He asked William, "Am I going to die?" William couldn't say a word. Edward's breathing became rapid, and he asked with difficulty, "What was the prophecy the witch told me again?" At this moment, William finally understood his father's story. With tears in his eyes, he began to tell a version completely different from the reality. "On a sunny day, Mom and I helped you escape from the hospital. We got into your red car that you had driven all your life, and it was still brand new. We drove all the way to the riverside. All your friends were there. The giant, the witch, the werewolf, the circus troupe, and the conjoined twin sisters. Everyone gathered around and applauded and cheered for you. You said goodbye to Mom and gave her back the wedding ring. Then you turned into a big fish and swam down the river towards the ocean. Your friends all stood on the shore, waving goodbye to you. Mom and I watched you swim farther and farther away." After hearing this, Edward showed a peaceful smile on his face and said with a smile, "Yes, that's exactly how it was." Then he closed his eyes forever. At Edward's funeral, William was surprised to find that all those strange friends from his father's stories were present. The giant's feet were twice as long as those of ordinary people. Jenny also looked like a witch. The friends got together and recalled the memories of Edward in their minds. Mother was dressed in red, with a happy look on her face. William knew that she was recalling the time spent with father. Many years later, William also had children. Looking at the eager eyes of his children who were longing to hear stories, William began to tell the story of his father Edward and the big fish. In the movie, Father Edward turned his ordinary life into a fairy tale. William is the listener of the story. His attitude went through the process of admiring his father when he was a child, doubting his father when he grew up, and truly understanding his father after becoming a father himself. This is just like our attitude towards fairy tales, and it's also the meaning of the existence of movies. Edward's real experiences and the stories he told his children were all the treasures of his life. Just like our real life encounters and the stories we see in movies are all part of life.